My name is Clara Mason. I am 29 years old, and I live in a small apartment in Brookfield Heights. I work from home, which has its perks, especially since I get to enjoy my personal space. However, this was a blessing that turned into a nightmare when my neighbors started a renovation project. It seemed innocent enough at first, but that was just the beginning of something that would push me to my limits. I had been minding my own business, sipping my morning coffee, when the sound of loud drilling shattered the peace. That first day was a calamity. I had to take time off work because no one could hear me speaking over the cacophony. The result? A deduction in my paycheck, and my monthly bonus vanished into thin air. I was furious and stressed, staring at my computer screen while the noise thumped through my apartment walls, drowning out my calls and sabotaging my job. As the days dragged on, the noise grew more pervasive, and the cheerful tone of my environment darkened. Each day consisted of hammering, drilling, and relentless banging, and not a single knock on my door from my neighbors to warn me. I finally decided to confront them, crossing the hallway to their door with my heart racing. With nerves in knots, I knocked and was greeted by a burly construction worker whose attitude suggested he thought he was more important than anyone else. Politely trying to convey my discomfort, I proposed a simple solution. "Just let me know the night before if you plan to make noise so I can move my work setup," I implored. The man agreed, but his gaze said much more. It was as if he rolled his eyes at my concerns. He really did not care. Weeks went by, and the drilling continued without any warning from my neighbors. I was at my wits' end. How could they be so inconsiderate? Most of my work was reliant on video calls, and yet here I was, becoming increasingly frustrated with each passing day. It felt unfair that my livelihood was being disrupted, while they seemed unaffected. Thoughts of vengeance bubbled up inside me as I realized that I could no longer rely on courtesy. One day, after returning from a trip to the store, I spotted my annoying neighbors in the hallway lugging heavy supplies from the elevator. An idea suddenly struck me, as sweet as it was diabolical. I live on the 7th floor, and there was an ancient elevator in our building. It clunked and groaned, lacking automatic doors. They had to be manually opened and closed. Perfect, I thought. I made my way to the 8th floor, where I knew my neighbors would least expect me to be. I quietly opened the elevator doors just enough so they would not run. It was a simple but clever trap. If they did not realize the door was ajar, they would be forced to climb 7 flights of stairs. I felt an almost mischievous thrill at the thought of it. While I stood in the dimly lit corridor, waiting for their arrival, I could hardly contain my excitement. Every minute was torture. I wanted to see their expressions when they realized they had to walk. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps. My heart raced as I strained to hear the faint sounds of their voices, approaching with a mix of frustration and fatigue. They entered the building and headed straight for the elevator. I held my breath, curious to know how they would react. The moment they reached the elevator, I watched as their laughter and chatter faded into confusion. They pushed the button, and when it did not respond, I could already picture their faces scrunching up, the realization dawning upon them that they would not have a lovely ride down. They quickly glanced at each other, and I could see the annoyance creeping into their expressions, or perhaps even embarrassment. Every sound of their footsteps echoed through the stairwell as they began their uninspiring journey up 7 flights. I stifled a laugh, picturing them panting and huffing as they climbed, all of it bubbling into a festering resentment for themselves. It was sweet, poetic justice. Each creak of the stairs added to my satisfaction, each heavy breath a reminder that they would think twice before ignoring me again. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, they crested the 7th floor, arriving panting as I stood there, arms crossed with a sly smile. It was a confrontation tinged with adrenaline. My heart raced, but I enjoyed the moment of silent triumph. "Need some water?" I taunted with feigned innocence. They stared at me, mouths agape, clearly not expecting to see me there. It was a battle of wills, and I was winning. In that moment, something within me shifted. I realized that my small act of revenge felt powerfully good in ways I had not anticipated. Perhaps it would teach them respect when it comes to living in close quarters with others. At that moment, I walked back into my apartment, closing the door behind me. As I sat in my chair, I felt liberated. I learned that sometimes, standing up for myself meant pushing back in unexpected ways. The pounding from the renovations continued, but my resolve to confront the noise morphed into a sense of accomplishment no longer laced with bitterness. Days passed, and as they completed their work, it became evident that my quiet enjoyment was returning. The lingering bitterness dissipated, replaced with a calm certainty that I could stand up for myself. I turned off my computer after a long day of work, taking a moment to appreciate the silence in my home. I felt a smile creeping onto my lips. I had turned the tables, and although things were not perfect, I had learned to take a stand. It was a small triumph, but a meaningful one nonetheless. In the end, my life in Brookfield Heights continued, but I was no longer the voiceless tenant enduring the noise. I had become a force of nature in my own right, with a newfound sense of respect and agency.